Hello, everyone, and welcome to the speaker series. Before we begin, I would first like to take a moment to acknowledge that while Business and Arts is a national organization with staff in many territories, I'm speaking to you from Tikaranto. I have the honor to be the guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat people and the Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee Confederacies, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. We are happy to have ASL interpretation for today's session. To enable ASL, please click the interpretation icon in the Zoom toolbar and select ASL. A new window will open with our interpreter, Jenny Stevens. Auto-generated English and French captions can also be turned on. There are no planned moments of lights flashing or loud sounds for this session. The session is being recorded and will be available in about a week to watch on demand, and this recording will include the transcript, session resources, and ASL interpretation capture. So hi, everyone. I might be a new face to you. My name is Laura O'Brien, and I'm Programming Associate at Business Arts. You may have seen my name come up in the chat in previous speaker series sessions, or if you are a recent Arts Fest participant. Aubrey Reeves, President and CEO of Business Arts, and our more frequent speaker series host, will be joining us for the Q&A portion of today's session. Only the presenters and moderators will have our microphones on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box and vote for the ones you think are most relevant. The session is scheduled for 1 hour and 15 minutes to give us ample time for questions. So thank you for being with us here today for this conversation on accessibility and disability leadership. July is Disability Pride Month, and it's my hope that the discussion today will feel connected and constructive. Now, before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to note that we've had a last-minute change to our roster. We are so grateful to Alethea Bakogeorge, Director of Programs and Development from the Disability Screen Office, to be here with us today in lieu of Winnie Luck. So without any further ado, let me tell you about everybody. Alethea Bakogeorge is a physically disabled access professional, fundraiser, and actor with cerebral palsy. She is the Director of Programs and Development at the Disability Screen Office and has worked across the country in fundraising and access at organizations, including the National Access Arts Center and the Musical Stage Company. She is in demand as an accessibility consultant and has taught and lectured across North America on disability representation in the performing arts, access and accommodations, and disability inclusive organizational change. Alethea maintains an active acting career as a physically disabled voiceover and theater actor. She lives in Toronto. Reid is a trans non-binary artist and arts administrator based on Treaty 7 territory in Mohkinstsis. They received their BFA with distinction from the Alberta University of the Arts in 2020, where they were awarded the Drawing Department Board of Governors Award and named valedictorian of their graduating class. Since then, their work has been exhibited in both public and commercial contexts. Bringing together a deep commitment to the arts and advocacy within the disability community, Reid has over 15 years of experience volunteering and working in the disability sector. They joined the National Access Arts Center team in 2021, notably serving as interim president and CEO from January through July 2024. They now hold the role of Director of Visual Arts. In addition to their work at NAAC, Reid contributes to the broader arts ecosystem through ongoing advisory and community-engaged roles. And lastly, but not least, Janelle Shaw is a self-taught visual artist who graduated with her master's in disability studies from the University of Manitoba. Her dissertation, an autoethnological study of art as a tool of empowerment, examined her own experiences with mental illness and disability art. Janelle is a passionate advocate for the disability community with a focus on accessibility in the arts. Janelle is the Executive Director of Arts Accessibility Network Manitoba, the co-chair of the Manitoba Artist-Run Centers Coalition, and sits on various art boards. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I'm delighted that you're here. I'll invite you all to turn off your mics and we'll start our discussion. So to kick us off, let's start with the big picture. How would you describe the current state of accessibility in Canada's arts and culture sector? Ray, how about you kick us off?
Sure. I think that I would describe it as in transition, perhaps a work in progress. I think accessibility is advancing in some areas that we're seeing stronger accessibility policies, dedicated funding streams, more leadership and kind of disability leadership across different arts organizations and initiatives, and a growing recognition that accessibility benefits everybody. Speaking from my perspective here in Calgary, it's a really exciting time in the arts sector that we're seeing a lot of different infrastructure projects pop up. And I have artists in my office every week from the NAC asking me first about our own building project. And then they want to know, they want the update across the board. They want to know what's happening with the Glenbow, what's happening with Contemporary Calgary, what's happening with the Workland Center. They're engaged and they're excited about the potential for participation in these spaces. I think also at times the conversation about accessibility can kind of stop at the front door. And not speaking about any organization in particular here, but I think that there's another layer that is cultural accessibility and how folks are invited into spaces and welcomed in those spaces. And I think that conversation kind of starts to lend itself more to belonging, that we can build a ramp, we can put in an elevator, we can meet all of the physical accessibility standards, but if artists with disabilities feel like they're being accommodated rather than sort of intentionally included in these spaces, then I think that there's more work to do there. I think that accessibility can still kind of be added on as this thing, and really kind of thinking about how we are designing it in from the beginning and bringing in folks with disabilities to really weigh in and make important decisions around how that's happening is extremely important. And while I'm very encouraged by what's happening in accessible infrastructure and sort of the broader sector right now, I think this idea about kind of creating environments where artists with disabilities and audiences with disabilities can meaningfully participate is something that I think the sector is still learning how to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I love how you said it's in a transition because I think that's very much what's happening right now. There's been a lot of people have thought about accessibility for audiences, and now we're starting to see that shift where people are starting to be more accessible for artists, and we like to go beyond that as well and look at accessibility for admin workers, right? And kind of looking at the arts as a whole. And while there is, I think, a desire to be more accessible, I think there's a lack of understanding of what that means, right? Everybody knows, what to do when there's a ramp, that's needed, or there's stairs, right? But it's the attitudinal barriers that I think people come across a lot. So things are definitely getting better. I know here in Winnipeg, lots of arts organizations are very interested in learning about accessibility. And I think the arts councils as well are kind of forcing arts organizations to think more about that. Like, for example, when you do your core funding, if you get core funding from any of the arts councils, some of the things they ask is about accessibility and how you're reaching out to those communities. They're doing things like the arts councils now where they're putting the access grant, a little button in every single grant so that it's right there front and center, that there's access, that's funding available for artists to complete their work. So there's definitely steps that are happening. It just needs to go further, right? I think there's just a lack of education and just knowledge of what we mean when we say deaf and disability protocols and what those are. And kind of, it's one of those things, you don't know what you don't know. But I find that everyone that I've spoken to is very wanting to be accessible, which is very exciting. So we're kind of in a transition where we're not there yet, but people are looking forward to it, I think. But there's still a lot of more funding and education that needs to happen.
Yeah, Janelle, I agree. I think that accessibility has come a long way in just a short couple of years. And I'm really encouraged by how many organizations the DSO works with that genuinely want to do better. Compared to even a few years ago, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, similar to what you're saying about the arts councils, I feel like accessibility is no longer a niche conversation. More organizations, particularly here in the screen sector, are developing accessibility plans. Funders are introducing accessibility requirements when you apply for funding. And and there's growing recognition that accessibility is more than just a compliance issue. That said, I do think that organizations often think about accessibility as something that you add on at the end of a project rather than something that you plan for from the beginning. And sometimes, even if those individuals want to do the right thing, they don't know how. So that's part of why the Disability Screen Office exists for the screen industry. We're here to give industry professionals the practical tools and resources that they need to build accessibility into their workflows from the beginning. So one example for us as an organization is Reframing Access, a best practices guide on disability inclusion in Canada's screen industry, which we just released last month. It's a free resource that walks readers through every stage of a screen production process, helps them understand common barriers to accessibility, and more importantly, how you start to remove them. So I can pop the link in the chat so that everyone can take a look at the guide for free. But that's a really exciting resource that we've just put out to the community, and hopefully that's going to help people start to do a little bit more of that learning.
I took a look at that document that you're speaking of, and it is amazing, very comprehensive, and it's just so great because it's a resource that anybody can use and just download, right? So I just want to say congrats on that. Such a great project.
Thanks, Janelle.
Yeah, it's really heartening to see that all three of you are doing different work, but so much overlap and so much like shared goals and priorities. And thank you so much for sharing that resource. We will definitely include it in our webinar summary as well. So if you're too worried about catching the link in the chat at this moment, don't worry, we'll make sure that everyone gets it. Okay, so I'd love to move on to our next question. What do you think individuals and communities with disabilities tell you that they need most from arts and culture organizations? And let's do reverse order. So let's start with Alethea.
Sure. I would say in my role, I spend a lot of time talking to disabled creatives, and I hear a lot from them that they struggle to get hired, they don't feel comfortable disclosing their disabilities, or who find that when they do get accommodations, that those accommodations are unclear, inconsistent, or simply not available. We also hear on the flip side, like I was just saying, from industry leaders that they want to make changes, but that they don't know how to. So, as a newer organization, many of you might not know that the DSO has only existed since 2022. Every DSO program exists because it's responding to a need that we've directly heard from the disability community. So, the Mapping Representation Project, which led to the best practices guide that I just popped in the chat, that was because we had never done any research on how many disabled creatives are actually working in the Canadian screen industry. That wasn't even information that Statistics Canada had. We have also put together a couple of different programs through conversations with disabled creatives at festivals, conferences, and industry events across the country. So for instance, we've got a new program that was just launched about 6 months ago called our Industry Resource Hub, and that is a list of accessibility and disability resources from across the country. Access service providers, accessible venues that you can use both for screening and for shooting in, as well as resource guides from the global disability arts movement. So the hub lists the tools and resources to bring production accessibility to life. But I would say that, something that we noticed in particular from our interactions with disabled creatives was that they often felt excluded from festivals and industry events. And those are the spaces where many careers are built because you have to go, you have to network, you have to make deals. But oftentimes, disabled creatives can't participate fully because of barriers to accessibility. So that led to the development of our Screen Festival Accessibility Program, which is helping to establish guidelines for accessible screen industry events across Canada. We're also going to be releasing a best practices guide for that, so stay tuned for that. Through our industry event access program, on the flip side, we help disabled creatives attend those events by providing passes, travel, accommodations, and accessibility supports. And we've also found that many industry professionals and organizations, too, are unaware that accessibility requirements exist at both the federal and provincial levels, and that these requirements carry legal obligations. So that's why we're developing the Accessibility and Disability e-learning series, which is a set of 4 short modules, asynchronous, that will serve as a baseline 101 level training program to help industry stakeholders understand and apply accessibility regulations, including the Accessible Canada Act and any applicable provincial legislation. And then, as I mentioned, accessibility is often brought into productions too late to make a real difference. So that's why we're working in association with the National Screen Institute in Winnipeg, like Janelle, to develop the Prod Access Initiative or the Production Accessibility Role Initiative. We are redefining how accessibility is going to be embedded into workflows and who is responsible for it at each stage so that it's considered all the way from pre-production through to the final edit. And then finally, many disabled creatives told us that applying for funding has been really, really difficult for them to navigate and that they've often faced additional administrative barriers, like Janelle was saying. So we're developing a sector-wide accessibility support and facilitation initiatives, which will support disabled creatives through the funding process while also working with funders so that they can make their own systems more accessible as well. I mean, at the end of the day, the biggest message we hear from disabled creatives is that they want equitable opportunities and they want accessibility to be built into the way that our industry operates so that they can focus on doing their best work.
That was amazing. It sounds like there's so much going on at Disability Screen Office. I'm learning things live this moment, and I've given your website and had many conversations with your team. So it's incredible to see how much work is going on. Janelle, I feel like you have some similar work with your work in Manitoba. Do you want to like kind of share a compliment to all of these
Absolutely.
wonderful resources that Alethea is talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all disabled artists here in Manitoba also have said this very similar things that the biggest barrier that they face to in accessing the arts is not the physical barriers, but the attitudinal barriers, and knowing whether or not spaces are accessible or not, right? So we have two things that we've done. We've created an accessibility audit for the arts, and that was created by and for the disability community. So it's disability led right from the beginning, which was amazing. We've done that audit at about 50 places across Winnipeg and in Brandon, and we're going to be doing some rural visits this summer. And so that really lets folks know what the space is going to be like. We look at front of house, back of house, admin spaces, making sure all those are checked. And through that process, we realized that a lot of art centers don't really know about disability, right? There's not really many anti-ableist workshops out there. So we thought we had to do that. So we created an anti-ableist workshop that we've given to quite a few people, all of the staff at the Manitoba Arts Council, about 50 arts workers here in Winnipeg. And we've done it some national workshops as well. And so that's a really great way to learn kind of what you're missing, right? So the anti-ableist workshop looks at the history of disability in Canada. So we look at some tough subjects. We look at forced sterilization. We looked at forced institutionalization, things that happen to our community here in Canada. And then we look at the disability rights movements and all the wonderful things we've done to create more access. And then we look at each group and kind of talk about what are the access needs for each group and the protocols of working with those communities so that when people leave, they have a really good idea of what it's like to be part of what the protocols are for working with this community. The accessibility audit is available online, and that's something that anyone can download. It's a 174-point checklist that you can go around your own space to kind of see what it is artists with disabilities are looking for. So it's a really lovely thing. In the anti-ableist workshop, we do at least a couple of those online. They usually pay what you can to make it available to everyone. But I loved one thing that Athena said, which was the applying for grants, like the funding system. That is one thing that all artists struggle with the most. Just trying to figure out what grants are available, how to apply to them, collecting all that information. That's probably the biggest thing I do is work one-on-one with an artist to work through that system. And usually with artists that I work with, once I've walked through, 2 or 3 grants with them, they know what they're doing now, so they feel comfortable. But a lot of folks really need that one-on-one because it's pretty complicated to apply for a grant. They don't make it simple and it's not very accessible. And I also love to hear that you guys are going to be working, the Disability Screen Online. Oh, I'm getting the name wrong. I'm so sorry. The Disability Screen Office. Yes, I love to hear that you guys are going to be working with the funders to try to maybe streamline or make those applications a little bit more accessible because it's such a barrier for so many people.
I completely agree with what Alethea and Janelle are both sharing that I think like that meaningful and sort of like active participation and representation in the sector is something that artists want so badly. And I think that kind of, the barriers to being able to actively find funding for projects and to kind of have these great opportunities, there's just so much more that's really blocking artists from being able to do that. At the NAC, something that we do is we'll sit down with each artist in the organization every year and go through a goal planning process and really talk to them about what they want in terms of, career development. And here are these great things that they did over the last year. What are the next steps? Where do they want to go? And they don't have small aspirations that they want to participate in the Venice Biennale. They want their work to be represented in the National Gallery of Canada, or even a lot smaller here. Like I've got one artist who is always like, I really 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 want to show my work in the Glenbow, and that kind of that access to space and celebration is something that I think a lot of our artists are really looking for. I also think that a lot of disability services that are in a lot of cities kind of focus on, can somebody go out and buy their groceries? Do they have sort of like a safe place to live? Can they sort of like maintain care and that kind of thing? And I think that those are so important, but there's also for, artists being able to have access to these great opportunities in the arts, like that's really sort of the difference of, kind of getting by and maintaining a life between, really living a life and being a part of something that excites them and where they can be celebrated. I think that arts and culture organizations have the opportunity to really be able to provide those supports, but really to sort of like echo what Alethea and Janelle are sharing. Like I think that there's this learning piece of really how do we support folks, and kind of rather than trying to fit them into this sort of like mold in this way of working and accessing those opportunities that that works for folks who don't necessarily have those barriers. What are some of those things that organizations and systems can really think about shifting in meaningful ways to provide that participation and that meaningful support? And maybe the last kind of piece that I'll add there too is, I think that there's a bit of a capacity issue as well that I'm, certainly bumping up against in my work, Janelle. Like I really relate to that feeling of, sitting down with artists one-on-one and really kind of like supporting them through a grant application process. And I think that comes with, having that relationship, really knowing somebody's work and their practice and kind of how to support them in articulating some of those things that funders really want to hear. But I think, there's sort of a larger gap there that unfortunately, we can't work with every single artist one-on-one. And there are kind of times when we're just oversubscribed and we can't, kind of extend as far as we want to. So
I always jump in off of other people, but you were saying something, Ray, that I thought was really important, which is I think a lot of artists with disabilities are showing a lot of artist-run centers, but we're not seeing ourselves in the bigger art galleries, right? Kind of those bigger spaces like the National Art Gallery. Like in Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, that's kind of the biggest one that we have. I'm really excited because we're working with them to bring one of our artists into that space. And that's something that is the first time for us, right? And so these opportunities are slowly coming, but that's come after years of, communications and network and building. And so it's slowly coming there. But yeah, I just really want to see more of all artists kind of at those bigger national type of galleries.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah. And please cut me off for celebrating and sharing your organization's work and your experiences every time. I'm just here to moderate. So you go for it, Janelle. All three of you, of course. Okay, so we've been discussing about the challenges for communities and individuals with disabilities and how they relate to arts and culture organizations. I'd like to shift the focus to more of your personal experiences. So in your lived experiences with disabilities, as well as leading an accessibility or disability organization, what are the most significant strengths and challenges to that intersection of work? Janelle, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, happy to. I think as someone with lived experience with disability leading a disability organization, I think there's a lot of strength in that. Members coming in understand that, we're part of the same community. There's kind of that built-in um, respect and accommodation already there. A lot of our artists feel like they don't have to advocate for themselves when they come. They can just relax and, just kind of be themselves, which is really great. The One of the challenges, though, of being part of the disability community and running an organization is the odd days where I need time off, right? Well, my access needs need to be looked at. But it's a really funny juggling act. I was speaking with this to someone else who is a disabled arts worker. And it's kind of funny when you're the one leading the organization, you're doing all this work to try to support and make sure that everyone has the access they need. But sometimes you forget about yourself and your own access needs, right? And it's something that might just come about with running a business that your stuff kind of gets put aside. But what I love about the disability community, and especially with my board and my staff, is we all look after each other, right? And so when they know that I'm doing too much, they'll say to me, Janelle, okay, it's time to take a break and, try to relax a little bit. So it's really lovely just to be in that community where you just don't have to advocate. There's just a relaxation and a calmness that I find, and an acceptance that comes through having someone with lived experience running that organization.
Yeah, Janelle, I think you've hit on something really important, which is that there's a lot of invisible labor that goes into being a disabled person working in disability arts and culture. We are all fortunate to be working at dedicated organizations for that serve disabled artists, but many disabled professionals who are working in this sector are working in other kinds of organizations where they are not only doing the job that they were hired to do, but they are kind of taking on the disability portfolio on the side of their desk. They're educating colleagues, they're advocating for accessibility, and they're helping their organization figure out things as they go along. And that's a lot to ask of someone. And that's a lot of labor that doesn't often come with additional compensation. So I would say that one of the things that we're trying to do here at the DSO is shift that responsibility from individuals to organizations by equipping, ideally, the entire sector with tools and knowledge and resources to build accessibility into the way that every organization works so that disabled individuals and in particular disabled creatives can focus on what they came to do, which is create. And that was one of the things that I loved the most because I got to work a little bit with Ray when I worked at the NAC a couple of years back. The entire ethos of the NAC is so much about sort of, stripping back all of the other things so that disabled creatives have the ability to just focus 100% on
Oh, nope,
creation.
it's back on.
And
Oh,
I would say that is such a unique part of it's such a strength of working as a disabled creative for a disability organization because I was born disabled, so I've spent my entire life navigating spaces, systems, workplaces, theaters
I
that
just,
weren't designed with me in
damn.
mind. So I have naturally started to look at problems a little bit differently, and I've become, I would say, and I think every disabled person has become very good at finding creative solutions, at adapting, and at thinking about how people experience the world differently. And those are really valuable skills in the arts because creativity is fundamentally about seeing possibilities that other people might miss. And then the other thing that I love about the disability community, like Janelle was saying, is how collaborative it is. People are constantly sharing ideas, resources, and solutions with one another. That's something that I've experienced across the country through the DSO. And it's one of the reasons, like I said, that we've been able to build so many of our programs. But I would say that, the challenge, just to get back to Laura's question about what is the challenge about this intersection, is that disability is so often viewed through the lens of limitation rather than contribution. We spend a lot of time thinking about what disabled people need, but not enough time at all talking about what disabled people can bring to the table in terms of creative adaptation. Because disabled people, they bring lived experience, they bring creativity, they bring resilience, they bring innovation, and they bring so many different perspectives that make our sector stronger.
Yeah, I feel like I can echo that a lot too. And, also approaching this question with some humility, and being, very clear that I've never had a formal disability diagnosis. Also growing up, I had major challenges in school with like learning how to read and write. And my mom and dad, were asked several times and kind of, prodded about getting me some kind of an assessment so that folks, my teachers and a lot of the people that were kind of experiencing me kind of like get myself into trouble, had some more kind of, things that they could attach to it to be able to support me. My mom and dad didn't really want to go down that route. Instead, they were just kind of like, this is a kid that has a lot of energy, and this is a kid that we kind of need to tire out. And so they overscheduled me, and I was doing all of these different things. And at a certain point, I really found this thing that I loved, where we had a ski hill. Here we have a local ski hill in the city called Canada Olympic Park, and every day after school, my mom and dad just started dropping me off there, and like, we'll be back at 9 p.m. when this closes. And at a certain point, like, that really was the thing that made sense to me. That was like a great way to kind of, to be able to kind of calm my busy mind and really connect with my body. And reflecting on that too, like, I think that my mom and dad really, instead of kind of, looking at the things that I couldn't do and things that I wasn't good at, or, really had challenges and the things that frustrated me, they really approached it from this place of, kind of thinking about how can we find environments where I can come as I am and be successful in those spaces. And I think that that's one of the greatest strengths that we kind of see at the NAC, is that kind of, rather than bringing artists in and being like, you're going to do this and then you're going to do this, and that's how you build a career. It's really thinking about, what are they passionate about? How do they want to make? What are the things that really drive them? And I think that starting with people's ambitions and strengths and interests and their creative potential, leads into these incredible ways of really approaching people as whole people, kind of, rather than, thinking about what they actually like can't do from your perspective, because it also may not be what they want to do. I think that one of the challenges that we also, bump into sometimes is really kind of like being asked to define, different sort of, people's experiences, where, one experience is one experience. I think a lot of our artists, create in ways, and the way that they storytell and their work doesn't always align perfectly with sort of conventional contemporary art standards. But, if you can kind of take a beat and really engage with it, that's every time what makes the work so compelling. Where I think is really exciting. Something that we've also really noticed at the NAC too, is we've been kind of trying our best to extend opportunities to artists who aren't coming to our studio, every day. We realize that there's this huge population of artists with disabilities who maybe don't want sort of that in-studio support, but still want those excellent career opportunities, that they're trying to navigate grant systems and application processes that are challenging. And that's where we can kind of come in as a resource. Sometimes we get some criticism from sort of the community about how we're kind of like defining disability standards, but I think that there's a possible, kind of shortfall with that then we can kind of start to get into, thinking about, putting people more in boxes than kind of greeting them as whole people. I mean, on a personal level, I still experience a lot of the challenges that I still had as a kid growing up, that I know that if there's something that I need to read, I need more time often, that, the way that I process information sometimes won't be kind of as quick, and I need to take a step back and really kind of, move through different ideas and decision-making processes. but, you know, I think that that has also given me empathy for the different ways that folks approach, you know, their practices and the ways that they want to be in the arts and the things that they want to do. So.
Thank you so much. All three of your reflections are deeply, deeply appreciated here, and I feel like you've given us so much to reflect on and celebrate about this intersection exactly. And I'm sure there's many people in the audience who also exist in this same place and have seen themselves reflected in your experiences. So I really appreciate you bringing yourselves to this conversation. I'm going to hone in a little bit on some highlights from your individual organizations. But before I do, I just want to remind everyone that you're welcome to post any Q&A questions in the Q&A box, and we'll be trying to get to all of the questions after we've finished up this section. So Ray, we've been talking about the physical space of the National Access Arts Center. And if for those who don't know, your organization is underway in an incredible physical space development project, which will be a multi-facility accessible arts learning campus. And I have seen it out there in the world that it is the largest capital project in support of the disability arts in Canadian history. So that is incredible. So many congratulations on that. And in your experience, what does it feel like for an artist to enter a space that was intentionally designed with them in mind? And of course, these are some things that you've been touching on, but like we can take a minute to celebrate that achievement.
Well, thank you so much. We are so excited, and you know, just kind of having recently broken ground on this capital project. It's been a big push. There've been a lot of tears. There've been like a lot of moments to celebrate, but we're just so delighted that, you know, that this is kind of it's real, and it's something that, you know, has been an aspiration for us since the roof of our current facility. It was attached to this old hockey arena, and the roof collapsed in 2018. Luckily, nobody was hurt. But, you know, of course, that kind of led us down this major road. And so we've been, you know, on this pathway for, oh gosh, 8 years going on 9, and really trying to figure out, you know, how do we do this? I think something that is the most exciting about this initiative is the way that our artists have been involved in it from the beginning. And so sort of through the design like phases, you know, the building isn't necessarily like intentionally designed for them. It's been designed with them to really think about what do they want in an art space? How does this support their practice? You know, how does this kind of get them those steps closer to some of the things that they want to do in their career and how they want to be in the arts? I think historically, a lot of disability organizations like ours are in spaces that are kind of, you know, aging. They're community centers. You know, they're kind of these spaces that have been retrofitted, you know, with great effort and labor, but they still don't really meet the needs of the community that is trying to occupy them and try to thrive in them. And so, you know, I think that piece is really exciting. I mean, I do want to share that after we had that big roof collapse, and it was before my time too. And so I'm, you know, this is also something that I've been told, but we moved into a recent space that was, you know, accessible. It was a pretty new build, and our artists had so many challenges in that space. Like the hallways were too narrow for two folks in wheelchairs to really like be able to comfortably pass each other. That there was kind of the entryway was step free, but it was really steep. And so, you know, there are major safety issues with artists at times, you know, losing control of their mobility devices. You know, I think that there's something that, you know, accessibility on paper and lived experience in a space are kind of these things that can bump up against each other sometimes and not really match. I think that, you know, our artists spend their careers creating this extraordinary work in spaces sometimes that are neglected or inaccessible. And, you know, having a beautiful site to be able to do that in is really exciting. The way that the building will also kind of be more inviting to our current spaces, to be honest, like kind of the way that it's set up, it's got this big fence around the perimeter, and it kind of says, don't come in here. Where I'm really excited to have a space that also invites folks in to be able to see this work, and to be able to engage with the artists, and to really, welcome in the community that we want to bring in. Also, there's a video that we created recently, when we had an event in Vancouver, with the Chung family, who made a significant investment in this space because they saw the value in that work. That I'll let folks kind of read later, but there are some great quotes, if it's okay if I spoil a little bit. But in that video, one of our artists says, "My life can be easier if I participate all the time," which just kind of speaks to having these resources in this space, and what they really want. And then another excellent quote from one of our musicians, Kobe. He said, "With more accessibility, there's more stuff to do. There's less confusion. I feel like, especially for any other artist who would come here and feel like they're going to the place that they want to go to. If there's more place, more space, more people, and more connections, it would definitely benefit." And I don't think that anybody can sum it up better than that. So.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it sounds like such an incredible space. And I have heard that this video might cause a couple tears. So recommend everyone checking in a good way, obviously. Yes, obviously in a good way. So everyone, please do check that out after the session. Janelle, I'm going to jump to you. You have a really interesting career trajectory where you've moved from serving on the board for Arts Accessibility Manitoba, and now you're leading the organization. And how has this shaped your perspective on leadership as well as organizational change?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I was on the board from 2012 to 2016, and then I took a couple of years off to do my master's in disability studies before I came back as the executive director. But it really showed me kind of, by starting off on the board, I really learned about kind of the collective and how to work with a group, because we were volunteer led at that point. When I was the first or the second ED to be hired. We had one person for about 6 months before me. And so we kind of learned how it is that we can kind of organize people, with volunteers and stuff like that. And then the switch to leading the organization, I kept that in the back of my mind of how to work with a board and the importance of that. Because I think, especially with disability arts organizations, it's really important that whoever's leading the organization, it's not just their vision, but it's the community's vision. And so it really taught me how important it was to always get that feedback from the community, from our members, to learn what it is that you guys want, right? Because I was a member, I was a board member. So, and it really showed me how important it was when I was able to give my feedback and the organization would respond, how great that felt for me. So to do that for someone else, to make sure that everyone's ideas and thoughts are coming in. It was just that it was really interesting, because I really found my community. Before I was on the board, I didn't tell anyone I had mental illness. I was very secretive about it. I didn't feel comfortable disclosing. And arts accessibility really showed me that there was a community for folks with disabilities, and that, we're all beautiful, we're all acceptable, we're all who we're meant to be, right? And so it just really showed me that joy that the community has, and I'm just so happy that I can share it and grow it as the director of this organization. So it's been lovely for me.
That's so wonderful. I think like on that thread, Alethea, what kind of disability stories and representation do you think Canadian audiences still need to understand or celebrate more, especially in your role at the Disability Screen Office?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to my role at the DSO, I'm also a working disabled actor. And I would say that I think a huge opportunity is to tell stories, more stories, where disability is just simply a part of what a character is and not their entire identity. And like I said, I'm a disabled actor, and consistently, the only roles that I'll get called in for, the only roles that I will book, are roles that are about disability being the central conflict. But the reality is that disabled people fall in love, they solve crimes, I'm sure. I definitely know that they raise families, they make people laugh, as evidenced by this panel. They lead organizations and they have lots of adventures just like everyone else. And those are the stories that I would like to see more of. I also think that we need to remember that authentic representation, even before bringing on an actor like me, starts above the line, starts behind the camera. If we want richer, sorry, above the line. No, below the line. Below the line. Thank you. If we want richer and more nuanced stories on screen, then we also need disabled writers. We need disabled directors. We need disabled producers. We need editors. We need executives. We need crew. Disabled creatives, they're already here. That's the reality. And they're very talented and they have a lot to say. And we need to build an industry where people feel safe bringing their whole selves to work and where their lived experiences can naturally influence the stories that they tell. And I think we also need to focus in on intersectionality as well, because disability doesn't exist in a vacuum. Disabled people are also Indigenous, Black, racialized, queer, they're newcomers, they're parents, they're seniors, and those intersections are going to shape how people experience the world, and our stories should reflect that complexity. I will say that there are some great examples already here in Canada. So shows like CBC Gems' You're My Hero and AMI's The Squeaky Wheel Canada really do illustrate what's possible when disabled creatives are given the opportunity to lead and to tell their authentic stories. And I would love for those examples to become the norm rather than the exception.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I only wholly agree. Throughout this conversation, I've been noticing how much of the challenges and the strengths that you're sharing hit those intersections of many different marginalized communities and ultimately so many of us, Canadians, of people around the world and within our communities. So thank you so much. I am going to invite Aubrey Reeves, President and CEO of Business Arts, to come back so we can take some questions from the audience based on the Q&A. So welcome back, Aubrey.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. Yeah, we have some great questions coming in from folks. We have right off the top a fairly technical question. Under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, known as AODA, nonprofits, especially those with front-facing exchanges with patrons, who might be living with various visible and invisible disabilities, are strongly encouraged to take these free online courses that come in 6 modules to learn more about the standards set out by the provincial legislation. What advice do you have for a board who may seem reluctant to engage in this training? And how do you encourage board, staff, volunteers, everyone associated that this is a important part of their training?
Yeah, I suppose I'll jump in, Aubrey. I think it's difficult to come at this from a compliance perspective. Valerie, you're asking here, is the expectation, is this being enforced in any way in Ontario? The difficulty with accessibility legislation in the province of Ontario is that the enforcement mechanisms are quite limited in this province. Unless you are bringing a human rights complaint against an organization, it's very difficult to sort of see the enforcement mechanism for the AODA. But I think that from a buy-in perspective, how we should be encouraging our staff, our board, everybody that we work with to take any applicable accessibility training that your organization is required to take it is because it's good for it's good for business. There are so many disabled people who would love to become patrons of your organization, but can't or won't because they do not feel comfortable putting themselves in a situation even where they are unsure of your venue or your organization's accessibility. There are so many disabled people who I know who say, yeah, okay, this organization might be accessible, but if they don't have an accessibility page on their website, if they haven't articulated their commitment to accessibility, then I'm not going to go because I feel nervous about running into barriers to access while I am with this organization and how they are going to be handled. And so I would prefer to only, engage with organizations that have been very upfront about their commitment to accessibility. So I would say that the purchasing power of the disability community is huge. 27% of all Canadian adults live with at least one disability. So, if your organization is not meaningfully engaging in the required accessibility training, and of course, I acknowledge that this is a national webinar and I'm speaking to this question because I'm the Ontario-based panelist here today in our little community of accessibility leaders. But, regardless of whatever your accessibility requirements are in whatever jurisdiction in Canada you are in, it's in your best interest to comply with it and to comply with it as fully as possible, because you really are missing out on some wonderful patrons of your organization.
Thank you. We've had a couple people asking roughly the same question, so I'm going to combine it together. Are there any municipal, provincial, or federal grants that to support accessibility or increasing operating funding to address capacity in accessibility?
We have something really great here in Manitoba called the Manitoba Accessibility Fund. And that started just a few years ago. And so what that is that's a grant that is not necessarily for the arts, but it's for any business or organization here in Manitoba that can apply for some funding to improve the accessibility. And we go with all the Manitobans Accessibility Act, Accessibility for Manitoba's Act, very similar to Ontario's. And so there's certain criteria, customer service and all of that sort of thing. And so this grant allows folks to make those changes. And it was actually through that funding that we were able to fund our accessibility audits. So it's a really great program if you live here in Manitoba. So I would really suggest applying for that. And that's usually happens in January, February is the application time for that grant.
Great. Ray, do you have any suggestions for your province?
Yeah, and in Alberta, and again, like I think that this is something that folks are really paying attention to, something that folks are really aspiring to have more resources. In terms of having something that, is surefire and really, really great and really sort of like defined by and for folks with disabilities. I mean, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I do know that that Calgary Arts Development has really been doing a lot of work about how do we kind of open up accessible funding opportunities to folks who are looking for that. They've been really thinking about and maybe this doesn't just apply to folks with disabilities. And I think, kind of to what Alethea was talking about, with the board of directors who's hesitant to, support an initiative that provides them with knowledge and training. Accessibility just trickles into everything, because there may be folks who don't, exactly identify with having a disability for one reason or the other, who that opens up doors for. The curb cut effect, I think, is this extraordinary sort of like concept, where curbs, being sort of sloped and slanted, so that folks with wheelchairs and mobility aids can get up onto a curb, but it benefits women who are pushing baby strollers, folks with bikes. Like it starts to kind of piece together and support all of these different communities. And so, I think that there's more work to do kind of in that funding space for particular, grant and opportunities like that. I do think that folks are really working on how to develop that further. I mean, the other thing that I will say that I am aware of is that Canada Council does have an access support sort of stream. And so if you apply for a grant and it does get approved, you can apply for sort of like an additional grant to support any kind of accessibility funding that you may need to support the project in a more meaningful and holistic way. But I think that that's something still, I think the funders are need to continue to be an active part of this conversation.
Yes, thanks. There's been a lot of information and discussion here, as well as celebration around the built space environment and accessibility projects. Panelists have touched also on attitudinal and other barriers. This person is asking if you can speak a bit more to other accessible initiatives and resources, if any, beyond the built space. So, for example, they say improved accessibility and operational practices, including employment practices and web accessibility, are two examples.
Yeah, Sharon, I think that's a great question. And I think the challenge around different kinds of accessibility barriers is that that's often something that is legislated by provincial accessibility legislation. And so the standards for what constitutes what constitutes a barrier in service delivery, for instance, is going to be different here in Ontario than it is in Manitoba. And of course, Alberta has no provincial accessibility legislation, so the standards there are going to be governed by their human rights code, as opposed to any provincial specific accessibility legislation. So I would say that the best resources for you are going to be the resources that are local to your jurisdiction, and that's actually why the Disability Screen Office is working on our accessibility and disability e-learning series, because many people here in the province of Ontario, for instance, I'll just pick on myself because that's where I live. Many people here in the province of Ontario are familiar with the AODA, but when we think about, what constitutes a barrier in context of a film set, which is a non-traditional workplace, how does the AODA apply to, working on set? How would accessibility legislation apply if you happen to be going and shooting up in the territories where there's also no accessibility legislation? So these modules are actually going to speak to, it's not going to replace your accessibility training that you may be mandated to take depending on where you live in the country, but it is going to speak to the different kinds of barriers that do exist in that part of the sector. Sharon, I don't know if you happen to work in film and television. Hopefully, this is a resource that can be useful to you, but I do know that there are lots of other disability arts organizations across the country that are doing similar kinds of work.
Yeah, and just to speak off of that, if you're looking for kind of that sort of thing, Tangled Arts, which is tangledarts.org, have wonderful resources, toolkits. So they have the Deaf Artists and Theaters Toolkit, Vital Practices in the Arts Toolkit, accessible funding information, accessibility toolkit. So all of these stuff, and that's except for the theater toolkit, it's really about visual arts. So if you're looking for information about how to make the visual arts accessible, that's a really great place to look at, just to throw some more resources out there.
Yes, excellent. Okay, we normally do not have cameras and microphones for our audience, but we've had a special request from someone to be able to ask their question live. I'm going to invite right now Mark Carroll to ask his question. I see he's just been added. So Mark, you need to unmute to be able to ask your question.
Hello, I appreciate that. I just want to bring up that thank you so much for doing this, and I apologize if, because I'm an artist with cerebral palsy myself. I do light painting. I haven't really done them to show anything. One day I would like to, but I also just do it for therapy reasons. I'm also a writer going to Toronto Film School starting in October for screenplay writing. And I'm also a member of the LGBTQ community, so this all hits me on different levels. And I just wanted to ask for for the career development and stuff like that, the career development stuff. I'm a person in Ontario, and I believe you said your organization's in Alberta or Manitoba. I apologize. I have ADD as well, so a lot of this, I might be spacing out on the names of the organizations off the top of my head, but I'm also Googling so I can put them in my messenger so I can call people later and research. Um, yeah, I was wondering about the career development thing. Is that open to people in out of your province? And also, I don't want anything for this, but I'd love to just connect with all you guys on some level to just learn more and see if I can help out as a writer to talk about the importance of art for therapy. And forgive me, the organization that said they also talk about disability history. I would love to know if there's anything I could do to help out with that as well. And I'll let you guys be on with your day, and thank you for doing this type of stuff. And I'll be mentioning this in Toronto Film School because more people need to know about these things. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Mark.
And I'm
I can
actually
jump.
Oh, you go ahead,
Oh,
Janelle.
go, Ray, go. I'll go after. No. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, first thing, Mark would love to connect with you. Something that the NAC is doing to sort of, to our like national sort of presence is we do have a space in Toronto. It's been a little bit of a tricky project because this space was actually gifted to us a few years ago, and the space itself is actually not accessible, and so it's posed some challenges in terms of really kind of getting the folks in who we really are keen to support. That is something that right now we have a couple of irons in the fire, and without saying too much, we are kind of hoping to move a little bit out of that space into something that works a little bit better. And so, also not making any assumptions that you may be based in Toronto. For the NAC, kind of really thinking about how we support artists in developing careers and kind of being a part of things in that way that are out of our studio. Yes, absolutely. That's something that is on the go right now. We ran a fantastic project last summer and fall that was the Canadian Korean. It was in celebration of it was the 60th anniversary of cultural exchange between Canada and Korea. And so we actually recruited 5 artists from across Canada to join us for that project because having a national presence was really important to us. And so we worked with 2 artists from Ontario, 2 artists from Vancouver and sort of like the BC area, and 1 artist from Calgary. We were just so thrilled about the connections that we made throughout that project and kind of working with those artists that it's something that has really been a big pillar in developing our new strategic plan about how we kind of continue to do that work and continue to expand it. I will say that sort of piece that we're working on is still in development, but again, having it be so important that things are co-designed with our community and that they're involve the folks that they're intended to support in decision-making processes and really kind of like weighing in on the big picture. We would love to chat with you a little bit more about what kind of supports you're looking for and how we may be able to provide them. So I'll hand it over to Janelle.
Yeah, that's great information. I was going to say we also work with people across Canada. We have members all the way from BC all the way to Nova Scotia. So we work with people across the country, and we do stuff like online or Zoom or telephone to do those one-on-one meetings because we find that that's really the most impactful for folks. It takes the most work, but that's that personal one-on-one guide is really what makes a difference. And we would love to hear about your experiences with disability history. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we came up with that with our anti-ableist workshop and the history of disability was through research, including with the People First of Manitoba, which is a group that supports folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, kind of the core people who are really in these institutions that were happening. So anytime we get to hear more experience and kind of what people went through, it really helps us kind of enrich that workshop so people understand this isn't something that happened. Well, it is something that happened in the past. The ripples are still felt to this day. And we're still dealing with the consequences of having our community basically be locked up for a big, lost my phone there. For, that portion when all the cities were being built up and built and all that, all communities were institutions. So there's still a lot of work to be done. But yeah, I would love to hear from you.
Mm-hmm. We are coming towards our end of our session. I have time for just one short question left. Can all of you give any success stories of how an arts organization has nurtured a safe disclosure environment in order to invite requests for reasonable accommodation?
I think that in order to create an environment where people feel comfortable disclosing their disabilities, accessibility needs to be built into the fabric of everything that you do. You know, it shouldn't just be a process where somebody is onboarded and say, okay, hey, this is the form that you need to fill out if you need to request an accommodation. Accessibility should be a regular item on your meeting agendas. Accessibility should be built into the strategy of all your events. Accessibility should be built into strategy of all your communications. And once people start to see that your organization is taking accessibility seriously, that management is starting to self-disclose their disabilities to other individuals, that everybody is, that an environment is created where people feel comfortable to say, hey, my access needs in this meeting today, or that I need to have my camera off. That creates an environment where effective self-disclosure is really possible, I think. But I would love to hear what Ray and Janelle have to say on this subject.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really agree with you about like the self-disclosure. Like whenever I do the anti-ableist workshops, I always start off with telling folks about my experience with the disability community and where I come from. Just because I find that others open up more when they hear somebody else opening up. But one thing that we do at our organization is if somebody wants to be a member and does not want to disclose that they're disabled, that's totally fine. We're still going to work with them. We're still going to help them out. We do let them know that, if you are part of a members show, it might be kind of implied that you have a disability because you're doing this work with us. But we don't require people to disclose because everybody's at different points in their life, right? And especially those who are newly diagnosed, they're looking for community, but they're still uncertain, right? And so we welcome those folks in. And usually after a year or two of being part of the organization, they're the first one out there being like, yes, I have disabilities and I'm proud. And so it's a really lovely kind of succession to see. And it's something that I went through myself. Well, I did not disclose what I with my mental illness. So it's a path that I've seen a lot of people take. And, we support people all throughout that path.
Yeah, and thank you, Alethea and Janelle. I mean, I agree so wholeheartedly with what you shared. I think that also, somebody's relationship, what they need, their experience, it is so particular to them. And so, I think that really kind of starting from a place of relationship and, and getting to know folks, and then, building flexibility into your model as well in terms of, kind of really creating space for people to ask for what they may need to thrive. And, the goals don't necessarily need to change. How you get there and what that process looks like and how, folks can be supported in that. I think that there's a lot of space for that. I think that also I love what you shared, Janelle, about, folks giving them that time to come into it, and then, kind of that piece of celebration. And I think that this is why we need more disability representation and more spaces for folks, is because I think that I think that there still can be a lot of harmful stigmas, honestly, around sort of disability and the way that folks engage in spaces, the way that folks, identify, which is something that that's personal to them. And so I think all really great answers here.
Well, thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have for questions. I'm going to pass things back over to Laura to wrap us up.
Thank you all so much, and thank you, Aubrey. I'd like to thank you so much, Alethea, Raewyn, and Janelle, for contributing your insights and your experiences to this discussion. I found it incredibly inspiring and motivating towards our shared goal of a more accessible and inclusive art sector. And I really just have so much gratitude for how you've shown up today and what you've offered all of us. And as well, a huge thank you to everyone who's participated through adding resources, links, personal reflections, and questions in the chat and the Q&A. I also want to extend our thanks to Jenny Stevens, our ASL interpreter, and a big thank you to Power Corporation of Canada, presenting partner of the Business Arts Speaker Series and supporting partner RBC. I do want to take just a small moment to shout out the 100 participating organizations of ArtsFest Regional. Over the summer, Business Arts is going to be sharing their impact and perspectives of some of these hardworking organizations on our social media, and I encourage you to check them out and learn more about the grassroots work that they're doing from coast to coast to coast. So if you'd like to learn about any more business and arts programs and events, please head to our website for more information or follow us on social media. And lastly, I just want to reiterate that I really appreciate everyone being here today. And I hope you enjoyed the session, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Many thanks and have a fantastic day.